Okay, good morning, everyone. So today's today I'm going to go over the endocrine system. And this is going to be broken up into a few different recordings. I'll probably do like an intro and then get into the actual glands and hormones. So I might break it up into 2 or 3 parts for the recording. So we're entering into a point where we're now going to get into regulation within the body. And there are two primary regulatory systems that the human body has. The first is the endocrine system, which we're going to talk about today. The second is the nervous system, which will bring us through the end of ANP1. Now, the primary regulatory system is going to be the nervous system. It is also your fast-acting system. If you need immediate responses, immediate processing, it's going to be the nervous system. The endocrine system does work with the nervous system, and it does work in that it will coordinate and integrate the activity of all body cells. However, the endocrine system influences mainly metabolic activities, and it's going to influence those metabolic activities by hormones that are transported in the blood. So the endocrine system is going to include essentially the endocrine glands and their secretions. The secretions from the endocrine system will be hormones. Now, responses will occur more slowly with the endocrine system. So when we get to the nervous system, you're going to see that responses actually occur in milliseconds. Milliseconds is 1/1000th of a second. That's not going to happen here in the endocrine system. If we just think about what needs to happen here, what's going to happen is a hormone's going to have to be secreted. When that hormone is secreted, it then needs to travel into the blood, travel throughout the body, and then bind to receptors on host cells. That's going to take a little bit of time. Okay? So the responses tend to occur more slowly, but also the responses tend to last a bit longer than those that we see with the nervous system. Endocrine glands will include the pituitary gland, and there's actually two parts to that. We'll have the anterior pituitary and the posterior pituitary. The thyroid gland, several parathyroid glands, which are embedded in the thyroid gland, adrenal glands, which are located on top of the kidneys, and your pineal gland. Now, there are some organs that will have both exocrine and endocrine functions, meaning that they will produce both hormones, but they will also produce various other types of exocrine secretions. Now, the definition between an endocrine secretion and an exocrine secretion is that endocrine secretions will travel throughout the body. And theoretically, every cell in the body potentially could be exposed to that secretion. Exocrine products or secretions tend to be more localized. They either will be secreted into the immediate area of where the gland is located, or they will travel via duct to, again, a more isolated area. An example of an organ that produces both hormones and exocrine products would be something like the pancreas, your gonads, which would be your testes or ovaries. We also have the hypothalamus. This is going to be a very important structure that we'll talk about over the next 2 weeks here. This has both neural and endocrine functions. The hypothalamus plays a huge regulator in a lot of the specific secretions from the pituitary gland. But it also has a very important neural function that we'll get into. You have various other tissues throughout the body as well. These other tissues have primary functions that deal with other things besides the nervous system, but they can also secrete hormones. Adipose cells, which are fat cells, thymus, cells in the walls of the small intestines. That's actually going to set up what we call an enteroendocrine system, which is sort of a feedback system within the digestive system. The stomach, kidneys, and even the heart actually secretes what we call atrionatriuretic peptide. So anatomy-wise, the structures get a little bit easier here. It's not like 100 muscles or 200 bones that you need to know here. The amount of glands that we have is very limited as far as the endocrine system is concerned. The pineal gland, hypothalamus, pituitary, these are all going to be within the brain. Your thyroid gland, parathyroid gland is going to be in the throat. Thymus is sort of right above the sternum. Adrenal glands are going to be located above the kidneys. The pancreas is within the abdominal region as well, and then the ovary or testes, which is located in the pelvic region. So hormones, they are long-distance chemical signals that are going to travel in the blood or in the lymph. Hormones are chemical messengers. They get secreted by the endocrine gland. They will be either peptide-based, which is a protein, or they will be lipid-based. Okay, and that actually is going to affect the way they might be transported. Autocrines, these are chemicals that exert their effects on the same cells that actually secrete them, versus paracrines, which are locally acting chemicals that affect cells other than those that secrete them, but they're local secretions. So they get secreted by a cell or gland, and they act within a neighboring region. Because both autocrines and paracrines are local chemical messengers and they are not considered part of the endocrine system, because the definition of the endocrine system is that these are long-distance chemical signals. Now, as I mentioned, hormones will come into two forms. We have our peptide-based ones, which are made up of amino acids. They're proteins. And then we have our steroid-based hormones, which are lipid-based. They are most likely going to originate from cholesterol. And they will have the properties of lipids. Now, as far as transport is concerned, these hormones are going to be transported in the blood. Okay, for your amino acid-based ones, because most amino acids are amphipathic. Amphipathic is a term that means they are both hydrophobic and hydrophilic. Most of the protein-based hormones will actually be able to be transported in the blood without any issue. Keep in mind, blood, which we haven't gotten to yet, that's AMP2, but blood is a liquid tissue that is primarily composed of the water. So whether something is hydrophobic or hydrophilic is going to play an important role here. The issue is with the steroids. The steroids are lipids. Lipids do not like water. They are hydrophobic. So what you're going to see with your steroid-based hormones is they're going to have sort of what we call chaperone proteins that will actually bind to the actual steroid and help with transporting that. Now, hormones are going to end up binding to some type of target cell. And what defines a target cell? A target cell is a cell that has a receptor to bind that hormone, meaning it has something to bind that particular chemical. When the hormone does bind to a target cell, you will see several actions that might take place. You can see an alteration in plasma membrane permeability, which could actually affect the membrane potential, something we got into a little bit with muscle physiology. This would be by opening or closing ion channels. These would be ligand-gated channels. Could also be the stimulation to synthesize proteins or various other regulatory molecules. You might have a hormone that might activate or deactivate some type of enzyme system. Could also induce secretory activity, meaning telling one cell to secrete a particular secretion or something along those lines. And it can also stimulate mitosis or cell division. Now, as far as how they bind to their respective target cells, again, we need to look at the structure of the hormone. Our water-soluble hormones, which are all amino acid-based hormones, they cannot enter the target cells. I want you guys to think for a minute. Why do you think they can't enter the target cells? Well, all cells have a plasma membrane, which is a phospholipid bilayer. The properties of the phospholipid bilayer are going to prevent a protein from just entering into the cell. So how do those particular hormones exert their effects? What's going to happen is they're going to have to bind to some type of receptor on the surface. They're not going to actually get into the cell itself. And what's going to happen is once that occurs, that receptor will then initiate a signaling cascade within the cell. And this is typically going to be mediated by what we call G proteins, which are coupled to intracellular second messengers. And this sort of sets up like a tag relay system where you're propagating the signal down into the cell. Your lipid-soluble hormones, on the other hand, because they are lipid-soluble, lipids like lipids. So these particular hormones can actually enter directly into the cell, and they actually end up binding to a receptor that's intracellular, so inside the cell. So one example of the second messenger system, this is again primarily for our protein-based hormones, is what we call the CAMP signaling mechanism. And I'm going to go to the picture here because this is what you're going to end up having. And if I can get my little laser pointer up here, there we go. Okay, so what we have is our hormone here. Okay, this is going to specifically bind to a receptor in the plasma membrane of the target cell. Again, this is a very specific interaction. Once this occurs, this will actually activate this receptor, which then activates G protein. G protein is called G protein because its activation is actually using GTP instead of ATP. So what is GTP? GTP stands for guanine triphosphate versus ATP, which is adenosine triphosphate. So you guys know that ATP, hopefully you remember from chapter 2, that ATP, adenosine triphosphate, has a nucleotide base, okay? Any one of the 5 nucleotides that we have in our cells, that's adenine, guanine, which is what we see here with the GTP, cytosine, thymine, and uracil. Any one of those 5 nucleotide bases can actually form triphosphate molecules. Now, the triphosphate molecule GTP is equivalent energy to an ATP. Okay? The molecules look very different because they are different nucleotides, but the triphosphate part, the bond between the 2 phosphate molecules, is the same. I always like to use a little analogy. Think of a dollar bill and think of a dollar coin. They look very different from each other, okay? But as far as their purchasing power is concerned, they are exactly the same. So these are called G proteins, again, because they use GTP instead of ATP. So now the activated G protein will then go and activate another membrane-bound structure called adenylate cyclase. Adenylate cyclase is an enzyme that will then take ATP and convert it into a molecule called cyclic AMP. Cyclic AMP will then act as your second messenger. Cyclic AMP then can go and activate, say, another enzyme, which will make an active protein, which then can trigger something else, and that can trigger something else, and that can trigger. It could be an entire cascade of multiple levels here. Ultimately, the activation of all of these various messengers inside the cell will trigger responses of the target cell. This could activate enzymes, stimulate cellular secretion, open ion channels, induce mitosis, various actions can occur. So just to kind of go through this one more time, here the hormone, the first messenger, binds to the receptor. That will activate the receptor, which then activates G protein. Activated G protein then will activate adenylate cyclase. Adenylate cyclase will then take ATP, convert it to cyclic AMP. Cyclic AMP will act as your second messenger, which then will lead to some type of cellular response or activation of a cascade. There's another type of second messenger system called the PIP2 calcium signaling mechanism. This is used by some other amino acid-based hormones in some tissues. This also involves the use of G protein, except now that G protein will activate phospholipase C instead of adenylate cyclase. Phospholipase C will then activate PIP2 into two second messengers, DAG, which is diacylglycerol, and IP3. DAG will then go and activate various signaling pathways. IP3 will cause for the release of calcium. And in this case, calcium will actually act as a third messenger. And as you guys are well aware from the skeletal muscle system, calcium itself actually can be a signaling molecule within its own right. Your steroid hormones, on the other hand, they diffuse right into their target cells. So there's no need for these external surface receptors. Once they get into the target cell, what will happen is they will meet up with a receptor within inside the cell. Okay. Once they meet up with that receptor, that then will form a complex, and that activated complex will then go and lead to some type of cellular response, much like the cascade in the second messenger systems led to some type of cellular response. So here you have the steroid hormone comes in, it binds to a receptor internally. This complex then goes and activates various types of responses. Okay. And you end up with some type of response. So just keep in mind how activation works, whether it is protein-based or whether it is that lipid-based hormone. Okay. Now, target cells must have specific receptors to which the hormone can bind. That is key. If there's no receptor in the target cell for the hormone, you're not going to get any activity. Okay. Adrenocorticotropic hormone receptors, these are only found on certain cells, so the adrenal cortex. Okay, and that's the only cells that will have a response to ACTH. Thyroxine receptors, these are found on nearly all cells of the body. So all cells of the body will actually have a response to this guy. Target cell activation will depend on three factors: blood levels of the hormones, the relative number of receptors, and the affinity of the binding between the receptor and the hormone. The affinity of the binding between the receptor and the hormone is how well do they fit together. If any one of these is off, you may not get efficient activity of the hormone or efficient binding of the hormone to the receptor. And that could actually affect the overall outcome of what you're trying to accomplish. And, when you have issues like this, this could actually lead to some problems with leading to some type of diseases like diabetes and things like that. How do hormones circulate in the blood? As I mentioned, this is going to depend really on their chemical composition. Your protein-based hormones are going to be fine in the blood, no issues with circulation. Your lipid-based ones, that's going to be a bit of an issue. They're going to have to be attached to plasma proteins, which will allow them to be able to be transported. Hormones tend to be removed from the blood either by enzymes that are there to degrade them after a certain period of time. The kidneys and liver, which will act as your two primary filter mechanisms for the body, they will filter out hormones. And a hormone's half-life is, the period of time in which that hormone is found in the blood levels and how long it takes to decrease that number by half. Multiple hormones may interact in several ways. You might end up with what we call permissiveness. This is when one hormone cannot exert its effects without another hormone being present. So you need to sort of have permission from one hormone in order to do something. Synergism, this is when more than one hormone products produce the same effects on a target cell. And let's say you get multiple hormones being secreted, that might just amplify the effect, where you would have a stronger message. Antagonism, this is when one or more hormones oppose the action of another, meaning one hormone might do one thing, another hormone will do another thing. An example of antagonism would be like insulin, which is meant to lower your blood glucose levels, versus glucagon, which is meant to raise your blood glucose levels. Now, the secretion or the release of hormones, there are three regulatory mechanisms that can be involved here, and they are humoral, neural, and hormonal. Humoral, this is a stimulus. So what you have is changing blood levels of ions and nutrients. So you have some factor that's changing, and that will ultimately lead to the stimulation and secretion of the hormone. For example, declining blood calcium level concentrations will stimulate the parathyroid glands to secrete parathyroid hormone. Parathyroid hormone causes calcium concentrations to rise, and then the stimulus is removed, which is actually a negative feedback mechanism, and the system shuts down. So the actual secretion of PTH is due to a change in calcium. Okay. Neurostimulation, this is actually neural impulses. So this is from the nervous system acting on a gland and stimulating that gland to secrete a hormone. This is something that we will see specifically with the autonomic nervous system, which is sort of your fight or flight mechanism. And, for example, you might see this with the secrete of your catecholamines, which is involved in that whole fight or flight. And then hormonal stimulation. This is when one gland secretes a hormone, and then that hormone acts on another gland to secrete a hormone. And that can actually lead to another gland to secrete a hormone. So you can end up with this cascade event. This is where the endocrine system is regulating the endocrine system, and that is what we call hormonal stimulation. Okay. Now, typically the endocrine system and the nervous system work together. And when they work together, we end up seeing, overall coordination. However, the nervous system can modify the stimulation of the endocrine glands and their negative feedback mechanisms. What that statement pretty much says is that if there is a situation where you are under certain endocrine stimulation, the nervous system can sort of kick in and take over and take control and change course. This is typically something that will result in severe stress, in which the hypothalamus and the sympathetic nervous system, which is part of the autonomic nervous system, are activated, and they will sort of take over. Okay. I like to use an example. Let's say that you go to a restaurant, which is not something we can do today, and you had a big meal, and you may have had a few drinks. And after that meal, your body is in a state of relax, and you are in digestive mode, and endocrine functions are at their highest. But let's say you're walking down the street to get your car, and you go down a side street and you get held up. Well, your body's not going to remain in that relaxed state. What's going to happen is your fight or flight is going to kick in through the autonomic nervous system. And you're not going to be concerned with digesting that meal you just ate. You're going to be concerned with getting blood glucose levels higher so that you can respond to the impending stress. And that is where fight or flight will sort of have it will have the final say and will override any existing situations. I think we're getting into, just excuse me. Okay, so that brings us to our first hormone or gland, which is the pituitary gland. And that's where I'm going to stop part 1 of this recording. Okay, have a good one, guys.